Good morning, students of class 9. Welcome back to the e-classes now. Let's continue our lesson in history. We are doing pastoralists in the modern world. That's the title of the lesson. And we have so far studied about the pastoralists of India, about mountains, pastoralists of mountains, plateau regions, plain, deserts, and their life, how their lives were affected by the colonial rule. So many things we have learned about in India. And let's talk about the pastoralists of other countries. Take the example of Africa. And in Africa also there were many pastoralist communities. So among them we'll study about the one community, that is Maasai. And in our previous class we have also talked about how the grasslands or pasture lands were taken over by the Europeans, especially their grazing lands were divided between British colonial governments and the Germans. So now their best lands were taken over. So we will study about number 7. There are 7 points. We'll go one after another. Where have the grazing lands gone then? Where have the grazing lands gone? So naturally the grazing lands were taken over for cultivation, for growing crops by the Britishers, for plantations, for construction of houses, for construction of roads, for white settlements and so on. They required land and the best lands were taken away. So now you can see that the best grazing lands were taken over for what purpose? For agriculture, plantation, that's another one. For construction of roads, that is also. And for white settlements. White settlements means the Europeans who came there to rule, to exploit the resources, they needed to settle in one area. So for their settlements, the best grazing lands were taken away. And Maasai, this community, they were pushed into a small area of South Kenya and Tanzania. So they were pushed toward the south, where the land or where the soil is semi-arid and with poor rainfall and poor pasture lands. They were pushed. They were never thought, these Europeans and never thought about these local people, how they managed to survive. They never thought. They thought about themselves only. They wanted to exploit the resources. Now here, number 2, the Maasai lost 60% of their pre-colonial lands. Pre means before. Before colonial period, they had a vast stretch of land where they could graze their animals freely, any number, unlimited numbers they could keep. Number of animals they could keep. But now, since they were restricted, the areas were limited, they could not feed their cattle properly. The Maasai lost 60% of their land, pre-colonial lands. Number 3, they were confined. Confined means isolated in one area. They were confined, isolated to an arid zone. Arid means dry region. To arid zone with uncertain rain and uncertain rainfall and poor pasture lands. They had no any other options. They had no options. They had to stay there. They cannot go to that pasture lands which were taken away by the Europeans. They were caught and punished. So they were driven away from that good pasture lands. And they had to remain in a semi-arid zone with poor rainfall and poor pasture lands. Number 4, from late 19th century, British colonial government encouraged the peasants, the local peasants, to expand cultivation in East Africa. The British government encouraged East African peasants, small farmers, to expand production, increase their land for production. So expand cultivation in East Africa and pasture lands were taken over. The pasture lands were converted into fields. So naturally their pasture lands were sliced one after another. and they were left with nothing. Dry lands, poor rainfall, poor pasture lands. So their life was miserable. Number 5, before colonial period, before the Europeans came there, before colonial period, Maasai pastoralists, the Maasai pastoralists, their numbers were very big. 22 million pastoralists we have talked about. Maasai pastoralists dominated their agricultural neighbors. The pastoralists dominated their agricultural neighbors because they had their bigger number. Politically they were strong, economically also they were strong. These agricultural peasants, people, they had a small field, they used to grow their crop for their own survival. That's all. They were very poor. But before colonial period, Maasai pastoralists dominated. Dominated means economically and politically. Politically means their numbers were very big, large, and they were quite rich. At that time, how they defined rich and poor? Rich means having a lot of animals. That person is regarded as rich. Those who had a few number of cattle, they were considered as poor. And the peasants who naturally grow food crops for their survival, they were poor. So economically and politically, Maasai dominated the agriculture neighbors. So you can see that. But by the end of colonial rule, the situation had reversed. It was just the opposite. The agricultural peasants, they had large areas of field, and the Maasai, their herds reduced. So the situation reversed. Agricultural neighbors were rich now. They were getting richer and richer and richer, and the pastoralists or the Maasai herders, they became poorer and poorer and poorer because their numbers of cattle reduced. And many of them, they sold everything and they became laborers. So they were left with nothing. So grazing lands were turned into game reserves. Not only construction of houses or settlements, Europeans, they took over the land not only for settlements, white settlements, for agricultural lands, for construction of road and infrastructure. Not only that, they also converted that grazing land into game reserves, hunting grounds, and those hunting grounds were used by the colonial rulers only. These Maasais were not allowed to enter there and go and hunt for their survival. No, not allowed. So what happened after this? So we'll continue our lesson in our next class. This much for today. I hope you have understood, and go through the book as well. Those who don't have the book, you can copy this out. Take the screenshot and copy this out when you are in the offline. So let's use your head also. How to manage your time, your lessons, and don't waste your time. Be wise enough to use your time properly and systematically, that you can say that. So that's all for today. We'll meet in the next class. Thank you for watching the video. That's all.